So for this week's main topic, we are big fans of the theater, the live theater. We've been to Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
Been seen a couple shows. I think you've seen a couple more than I have. But we used to watch when we were in San Diego. We had season tickets to when the touring groups of a lot of these shows would come around. We've seen shows here in Florida. We've seen shows elsewhere, including Hamilton. We've seen multiple places, but we just love live theater, and we love Disney live theater. And this year just happens to be the 30th anniversary of Disney on Broadway. So we thought maybe we should start taking a look at that. And when we take a look at things, well, that means we get a research piece from Michelle. So how exciting is that? Michelle, Disney on Broadway hits 30. What are we talking about this week?
Gosh, I say this every time that there's so much information to try to filter and whittle down. In talking about Disney on Broadway, that in and of itself has so many aspects, and I know we want to probably do more of that.
I'm guessing.
Yeah, with some others. But just like you said, it's the 30th anniversary year for when Beauty and the Beast first hit Broadway. And I thought this would be a great time then to take a look at that, but there's also some other things we want to get into. But before we start, I do want to say that, as with all my research pieces, I do try to make sure that we're getting information from reliable sources. And although the internet was in its infancy 30 years ago, it was starting to have some things being posted from reliable resources, and also companies or, news affiliates put some of their archive things now more recently to the internet. So I felt like we had a good amount of reference material out there that we could talk about. And also found that we have in the vault here some...
In the vault? You mean the plastic toad over there in the vault?
Yes. But we were able to pull them out of that vault. Some Disney magazines from the mid-'90s. So it was kind of a treat to get to pull them out and look back at how things were being written about Beauty and the Beast on Broadway. We found different ones that had the before, during, and after release date. So it's kind of fun doing that as well.
Very cool. Yeah. I can't wait to hear all about this. Beauty and the Beast. One of my favorite Disney animated films, but it's also one of my favorite stage shows. So can't wait to hear all about this. Go ahead, Michelle.
All right. So let's start back in the beginning of the beginning of when it was released, 1994. And as I mentioned, we chose it because of the anniversary and of when Beauty and the Beast opened at the Palace Theater in New York in 1994. And obviously that set the stage for future productions by Disney like The Lion King, Aladdin, Frozen.
Yeah. Hashtag Real Men Love Frozen. Still haven't seen it on the stage yet.
I know.
Hoping for a touring company to come around. Now there's we're not seeing it on Broadway anymore.
I know.
The closest we came was getting to see the two actresses that portrayed Elsa and Anna at the Festival of the Arts, the little Disney on Broadway showcase they do, and they were here this year, and that was nice. But I still want to see the whole show. But sorry,
that's
I digress.
All right.
Go ahead.
All right. So good info. So today, the Disney Theatrical Group is among the most successful commercial theater producers in the world, bringing its 10 Broadway titles and having been seen by nearly 230,000 million theater goers in 38 countries. So
wow.
Pretty impressive.
It is very impressive.
And we're going to dive into this theater production in a bit. But first, there's some other information that I thought was pretty interesting and kind of actually paralleled the story of Beauty and the Beast and with the story of what was going on with Broadway. So to do this, we have to first go way back. Thank you. A tale as old as time.
Play the harp.
So, and that's, as I mentioned, Broadway in its heyday of live theater, they were considered the rulers of the entertainment kingdom. And New York theater was big business. Think about it, that there were like the New York social elites, flocking to see the Ziegfeld Follies and hear the latest musicals from urban Berlin. They say there were spectacular restaurants on Times Square as well, with rooftop gardens on a lot of the theaters. And so after the performances, there was drinking and dancing that supposedly went on to the wee hours of the night. So as you can see, with Beauty and the Beast story, we start by first seeing that the castle in the Beast was very elegant, rich, beautiful. So that was Broadway, very much like Beauty and the Beast. But as we know, things began to change, as they did in Broadway. By the late 1970s, the industry really had been changing, with movie theaters, etc. And Times Square's really significantly, not a little bit, but significantly deteriorated. In fact, I saw a post that it was considered a civic embarrassment. The streets were filthy. There was a sky-high crime rate in the area. The place was littered with a lot of X-rated video stores, peep shows, and they said more than 100 other sex-related businesses in Times Square. So pretty bad, pretty dark. So in 1980, the city and the state launched the 42nd Street redevelopment project with plans to, help bring the location back to being more safe, more, welcoming, and more viable. However, the efforts of that group really very quickly actually got bogged down because there were some political fighting with developers and lawsuits over how the plan should be or what they were being considered. And then, of course, there was some economic slumps in the 1980s that practically killed this plan, this project development completely. And in fact, even 11 years had gone by and the project was at a standstill in 1991. The developers who the city and state were handpicked to help this planning group were no longer considering the area viable to with the current market to build there. And in fact, the next year, 1992, Governor Cuomo didn't even include Times Square among the projects intended to jumpstart the economy in his annual State of the State message. So, again, like Beauty and the Beast, things were looking pretty dark for Broadway.
Like that last pedal was going to fall off the road.
That's
right.
Yeah. Good analogy, baby. I like that. So, but then along came Belle. And let's say figuratively, literally here, there was a light. So actually, within a few years of that, 1992, where it's not even being mentioned, there were hundreds of millions of corporate and entertainment dollars starting to flow into Times Square. So just a couple years later. In fact, New York Times writers Charles Bagley and Randy Kennedy posted, Times Square is a swirl of theaters, themed restaurants, tourist buses, and construction cranes. It has become arguably the most sought after 13 acres of commercial property in the world. So how do you think that turnaround in just 5 years from being almost depleted of being considered any planning to now having many large companies interested in becoming part of the growth of Times Square?
How? I don't know.
Well, the claim of many developers say that it was in large part because of what was considered a quote-unquote comparatively trifling amount of money promised by one single company.
What company could that be?
I don't know. I would guess it would be the Disney company. In fact, I know one of the city officials described it as the bell cow to lead other reluctant companies into Times Square. Richard Cahan, and I don't know if I pronounced that right, who was a former president of the New York's Urban Development Corporation, said, quote, "What made it possible was Disney and the basic change none of us could have anticipated in American urban retailing technology and the communications industry. It's what people dreamed of. Very high energy, people-oriented entertainment. It reverts back to what was once in the New York City history.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah. So
Disney stepped up, made things happen.
Yeah. So this was the deal. In late 1993, the company agreed to put up $8 million. $8 million. Where's $8 million? Not billion. $8 million of its own money toward the renovation of the New Amsterdam Theater, while the city and state officials agreed to provide them more than $30 million in low-interest loans. So David Malmuth, who was the vice president of Disney's development company, admitted himself even, quote, by Disney standards, it was a small amount. It was a small deal. But he added that the company was putting something greater than money on the line. And again, as a quote, he said, it was the brand risk. We were terrified that we would go forward and there would be some unspeakable, horrible act on 42nd Street, end quote. But fortunately, they decided it was worth the risk and never turned back, as they say. So, but speaking of turning back, let's get back to Beauty and the Beast then.
The tale as old as time.
That's right. But as you can see, Broadway kind of went through a parallel type of lifestyle that we see portrayed in the play.
That's
Beauty
interesting.
and the Beast.
Definitely interesting analogy for sure.
Thanks. Okay, so let's start by talking a little bit about the animated film Beauty and the Beast. That was met with critical acclaim. In fact, Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune described the feature as, quote, an instant classic with songs worthy of a Broadway musical.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder why that was.
I know. And
Could have been the people tied to it. May have had a little bit of knowledge on Broadway.
Possibly. The musical potential was also noted by chief drama critic of the New York Times, Frank Rich, who described the film as having, quote, the best Broadway musical score of 1991, end quote. And better than anything he said he had seen on Broadway that season. So, again,
It's high praise.
Yes, 1991 was the animated film. They didn't have any deals with New York. They weren't even sure what they were going to do next. But Broadway wasn't necessarily on their radar. Now, interestingly, Alan Menken shared in an interview that he had been approaching Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg on multiple times to consider doing something on Broadway.
I had been, after Jeffrey and Michael, to listen to various theatrical projects that I was developing and see, do you have any interest in this? And they said, no, we have no interest in Broadway. We have no interest. No. And then one day they sort of softened and said, you know, we do have an interest in Broadway and we have an idea. It's going to be Beauty and the Beast on Broadway.
So, of course, we know why they said yes to Alan Menken. They, at that point, already knew they were going to New York City. So, now, do you think Beauty and the Beast was their first choice for a Broadway play?
That's a good question. I would think it would have been high on their list. I mean, especially as much success as it had in the theater. You just talked about the various different people saying it had the best soundtrack and was basically a Broadway musical on the screen. Why not? So it makes sense. But I'm guessing from the way you phrased that question that I am probably incorrect with that.
Right. It was actually that they would have preferred and wanted to do Mary Poppins to start their Broadway debut. And any ideas why they didn't do Mary Poppins first?
Does it have something to do with the person who wrote Mary Poppins, possibly?
Exactly. Miss Travers wouldn't give them the rights to do it. In fact, even in the early 90s, no one had the rights to Mary Poppins for theater. It wasn't until 1993, legendary British producer Cameron Mackintosh He had actually also been trying to woo that from her for several years, but he finally did get to meet with her in 1993, and she happened to be in her 90s at the time. And so what he did was he said he explained to her that he loved her books and aimed to restore the quote unquote sharp tone of the storytelling and, again, the quote unquote Travers reality of the characters. So Mrs. Travers did sell to Mr. McIntosh the rights for perpetuity. But she also was in agreement to sign a clause saying that the musical could use Disney material for it.
Wow. There you go.
Yeah. So there was a Playbill article about when they were announcing that this co-production was going to take place. And they said that Disney Theatricals and Cameron McIntosh co-producing a stage musical version of the classic film Mary Poppins. This marked the first pairing of the two theater giants. Disney Theatricals, represented on Broadway with long-running hits, and Cameron McIntosh, who had produced the three longest-running shows in Broadway history, Cats, Les Mis, and The Phantom of the Opera. I like that, how they put that, but I think I really found it interesting how the New York Times described this announcement. They said, it was a shotgun wedding. Disney held the rights to Mary Poppins songs by the Sherman Brothers, but McIntosh held the theatrical rights.
There you go.
So Mary Poppins actually started in London theaters for a few years before coming to the new Amsterdam Theater on Broadway, which, again, that was the theater that Disney had promised to renovate as part of the deal with.
But that wasn't the first show at the New Amsterdam.
No.
The first Disney show that they had done after they renovated, redid the New Amsterdam Theater, correct?
Right. That was
The Lion King.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. And that theater did require a ton. I mean, it wasn't something like, oh, they haven't used it in a while. I was reading about it, and it was like it had serious roof issues and had leaks. They said there was like a foot of water in the basement. They said mushrooms were growing everywhere. And that, due to water damage, things like murals and everything were damaged significantly. So it was a pretty significant project to bring the New Amsterdam Theater back to life.
Very good.
So, now, talking back again about Beauty and the Beast, the theatrical production, as you mentioned, the composer, Alan Menken, was a big part of this, along with his former partner, Howard Ashman. And it was obviously sad and difficult to consider moving forward with a new project of that same storytelling without Howard. But they did bring in British lyricist Tim Rice. And I was listening to an interview, actually, not about this specifically, but it did come up in the conversation when they were interviewing Alan Menken about that, and he did say that, Howard was such a brilliant person, and it was going to be different, or he did feel it was very different working with Tim Rice, even though he felt he was also brilliant in his own right as well. It was just a different style that he had to get used to. He described working with Howard as being able to just kind of throw out the melody there and just let Howard take control. And he said he was always very wonderful and amazing. And he said he made him laugh a lot. He, even with Beauty and the Beast, he said, who would ever think of the lines, I'm covered with hair and all of my decorations,
All right.
antlers. He said, that was just, he said it just made him laugh at how Howard would approach the lyrics. So, but there was a bright spot, though, that they were able to bring back a song that Howard was involved in writing called Human Again, that they did have to cut from the animated film because it was issue with time constraints with the length of the movie. So he was really happy to be able to bring that part of connection with Howard to the theatrical performance as well. But both Tim Rice and Alan Menken were kind of nervous about this because Disney was already doing stage shows at the parks. And they were really concerned, is this going to end up being like that? And as Bert and Mary Poppins would say, rightly so, because the director, the choreographer, and scenic designers weren't Broadway regulars for this theatrical production. They were the team that did produce the shows at both Walt Disney World and Disneyland parks. So there was kind of like that underlying concern.
Sure.
Fortunately, they brought in Linda Wolverton, who was actually the original playwright for the animated film. And she worked closely with Menken and Rice to make the adjustments to, expand the storyline and to make effort to make sure that people understood why Belle and the Beast fell in love. Because as they recognized in the film, the audience just had to kind of accept that.
Right.
So
it happens somewhat quickly.
Right.
Especially, they shifted gears very fast in that film.
Right. So, in this particular case, they wanted to make sure that they, gave time to really show how that relationship grew and how their love together made sense and grew together. So, anyways, that's how they kind of approached it. And it was great that they brought in, the original screenplay writer, I think, to have that fluidity into what people were already accustomed to with the animated film.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, especially if you're looking to, switch something over, you do want that voice from the person who actually put it together to begin with,
right.
And then can, say, this is what we were thinking with the film. This is how we can obviously adapt it to a stage performance.
Right.
And I'm glad that they did that rather than just have somebody that was not unattached
right.
to it. Or, love Alan Menken to death,
right.
but, he's a composer. He's not,
right.
he's not going to be writing the screenplay for this. So they
right.
needed somebody that kind of had that grounded sensibility to
exactly.
put in that slot.
Right. So they actually added 7 new songs to the theatrical production. Of course, one of them was already written with Howard Ashman. So Menken and Rice wrote 6 more songs to, help, again, broaden the storytelling, expand the duration of the production so that it met with what was consistent with going at Broadway. So the cast, the original cast, and I'm not going to go through everybody, but the highlights of the main cast, of the main characters. The Beast was played by a Broadway veteran, Terrence Mann. Belle, she was actually a relative newcomer, Susan Egan.
Your bestie.
My bestie. I like her a lot. She actually auditioned for the film at the request or at the insistence of her agent, let's say. She had not seen the film. So when she was, actually going for her auditions, she hadn't. And she realized that she needed to look Disney, but she also knew she didn't want to look like she had seen what Belle looked like, And she said when she went to audition, everybody was wearing blue dresses and, their hair styled like Belle. And she went in with a red dress, The other thing that she mentioned that one of the producers happened to notice that while she was waiting for her turn, Susan Egan was sitting kind of in a corner reading a book. So I think that kind of connected with them that, she's that kind of connection with the character. Gaston was played by Burke Moses, and Maurice, do you know who he was played by?
That was Tom Bosley. That was Mr. C.
That's right.
Mr. C. Played crazy old Maurice.
Exactly. Yeah. So he had been in some other performances on Broadway before, so this wasn't his first rodeo there. But it was great that he was brought in for that. So next comes the reviews. I know.
Dun, dun,
dun. Dun, dun, dun. And as expected, the reviews weren't really favorable. I mean, there was that whole concern of, Disney coming in already to Broadway, and were they going to Disneyfy everything? Was it going to be, lose the intentional soul that area had? So I think that there was a lot of that baggage that was brought in when some of these critics were
old school theater critic,
Yeah.
not seeing what was the future possibly.
Exactly. And I'm not going to go through a lot of them. I'll give you a couple of them and just little snippets. The New York Times, David Richards wrote, "As Broadway musicals go, Beauty and the Beast belongs right up there with the Empire State Building, FAO Schwartz, and the Circle Line boat tours. It's hardly a triumph of art, but it'll probably be a whale of a tourist attraction." He went on to criticize that as the play really didn't leave anything to the imagination, and he just thought that was such a lost opportunity for them. He also wasn't very favorable to the actors as well. Variety had a review out, and they said, "Disney arrives on Broadway with a bang, and a boom, and a roar, plenty of fireworks, and a fistful of lovely songs. It will almost certainly be met with the varying degrees of derision by Broadway traditionalists. The complaints, however, will be meaningless where it counts, which is at the Palace Theater box office and the Beauty and the Beast Bazaar that used to be the Palace lobby. Disney's first Broadway show will be packing them in and thumbing its noses at the naysayers for a very long time."
And that it did.
Playbill wrote, "The original Broadway production of Beauty and the Beast opened at the Palace Theater on April 18th, 1994. Reviews were mixed, but audience reaction was not. Beauty and the Beast was Broadway's first real show for families." I don't know, I'm getting emotional. "And they came in droves." And I did see another interview with Susan Egan, and you could tell this was years later, decades later from when she had no longer been playing the part, but she remembered, you could tell it was still so vivid in her mind, that the reviews of the actors were not very favorable. Even Tom Bosley said he wasn't very good. One of the critics said he wasn't very good at all. I mean, and as well as other performers who had been on Broadway before. But she did say that that the character who played Lumiere, the gentleman who played Lumiere, would take her outside from time to time, and he said, "Look at this line around the block. Don't you worry.
Yeah.
They love you." So I thought that was kind of cool.
It is very cool. And, I mean, I didn't get to see the original cast. And that might be something different for you, but I've heard the cast recordings and I love what I hear from it. I mean, there's some corny moments even in the cast recording that you're like, okay. But I just love it. And, we're big Susan Egan fans. I joked about Michelle being your bestie. It's because they took a selfie together when we were on a Disney cruise ship or whatever. But
so
she is wonderful and we love her. And I don't know how anybody could denigrate those people.
Right.
And, Susan Egan has nothing but great things to say about all of those, that cast that she worked with.
Right. Yeah. And I was not able to see the original cast. But I did see, I believe it was the second main cast that came out of that. My older sister took me to see this on Broadway and just loved it. And I'll be asking you about your opinions later.
Okay.
But, I did want to bring up that, there were some negative reviews, but, as, brought up by several of the critics, that it was the audience that still were the ones that found joy and enjoyment from watching it. And so the other thing that I thought was really interesting, there was an interview with some of the cast, and this particular comment I'll share with you really showed how this performance, this production in the theater really was something that resonated with young audiences, and they weren't going to be influenced by the reviews in the New York Times or whatever. And Beth Fowler, who played Mrs. Potts in the original cast, she pointed it out this way. She said, quote, "When I'm speaking to Chip and there are hundreds of children in the theater, you can practically hear a pin drop. You know that you've got their attention."
That's cool.
I thought, it's, yes, it may not be to the level of Shakespeare, but in looking at the purpose of theater, it is connecting with audiences.
Well, I mean, it's good that there's both things out there. I mean, yes, that there could be these great critically acclaimed shows, plays, musicals, whatever, and that maybe they don't hit across the broad base of people. There's a lot of people who will love it, but maybe it's not, the most popular thing, and it's not going to hit a lot of people. Whereas there's other things that maybe they aren't, critically known well.
Right.
They're not huge award winners, yet a wide swath of people absolutely adore it. They love it. They love the energy. They love the feeling they get from it. And, that ends up being, what it is as well. It's good that there's room in this world for both things.
Right. Exactly. Some of the other things that were advantageous for Disney with this, maybe over some of their competitors, is that, well, one, they were ready and starting to use new marketing methods, thanks to the internet. So they were right in line to do that right away. But they also knew that they had a pre-existing brand, and that most people know the story, would feel comfortable coming to the theater with that knowledge, feeling like they kind of knew what to expect. It's just maybe more intrigue of how are they going to take what was animated in kind of a, very obviously not kind of, but a very unique situation of people turning into objects. Yeah. How are they going to do that on Broadway? So I thought that was kind of really, intriguing to hear about that.
Completely.
So now I can't leave you without some fun facts.
Yay. I like Michelle fun facts. They're the best fun facts.
So first of all, Lumiere's hands, he's the candlestick guy. They were made.
The candlestick guy. That was what they almost went with.
I know, right?
I'm glad they went with Lumiere.
Lumiere, yes. They were made of flame-proof plastic surrounded by a flame device that uses an ounce of liquid butane per hand per show. So in the first 10 years of the performances of the show, it burned 700 pounds of butane.
Wow.
Yeah, I saw an interview with the actor who played Lumiere first, and he said that, there was so many different people working on this. So you had, the person who was doing the costuming, and you had the production person who was going to be involved with, the flames and everything like that. And the stage people. And he said there were 3 people adding things on to what he was going to have to carry each and every night. So it was kind of cute that he said that.
We've seen somebody who played that, not one of the first few times around, but somebody who played the role later on, talk about playing that role and how difficult it was, because if you think about it, one, you're acting and you have to play this part, and maybe you have a French accent, maybe you don't, right. Maybe you're trying to work it out there. But the most difficult thing is that you're basically spending almost the entire show with your arms kind of up in the air at a 90-degree angle each one. And I tell you, try and just sit there with your arms like that for a while. Just do it for 10, 15 minutes and see how your arms feel after a while. And then think about doing that for about a 2.5-hour show where most of your arms are doing that, so you can form the little candelabra thing. That's true. That's got to be a workout. I mean, that's going to get your biceps going. That's
exactly.
For sure.
Good point. I had forgotten about that, but yeah. The Beast needed 3 people to help put on his makeup and prosthetics, hair and wardrobe. Originally, the process took over 3 hours before each performance. Eventually, over time, they got it whittled down to 1 hour. And to help him achieve that animal-like appearance, he wore special latex gloves and had special rubber toes glued to the outside of his boots. And I saw him in a TV interview, I think it was on Good Morning America when it was coming out, and he said it really was very tedious of a process and super heavy. He's very heavy and hot. He said, think of putting on all these layers and then still having to go out and perform.
And you got all these hot spotlights and everything on you, and the crowd, they're not
right.
Yeah.
And like the second act, he's almost on stage the entire time.
Right.
So he said it was incredible. They did ask him how long it took to take it off, and he said 7 minutes. He just
Rip that thing right off.
Yeah. Speaking of heavy, Belle's ball, the ball gown weighed 30 pounds.
Oof.
I know.
It's about as much as Susan Egan weighed at that time.
I know, right? That's a good point. So there was an interesting shift from the animated film to the musical, and that related to the castle staff. So Lumiere, Cogsworth, Mrs. Potts, they were transforming over the course of the play into these animated objects more and more. So instead of keeping them in the same appearance and the same costume throughout the whole show, they were actually gradually becoming more and more like the household objects that they were portraying.
That's interesting.
Yeah, quite a challenge for their costume designer. So while they were testing the waters in Houston before they went to Broadway, they noticed during their trials that they had put so much into the production components that they even realized that the story got lost and that they had to really pull back some of the things with the set and the costuming to really tone it down a little bit so that it wasn't.
The story was more forward and not just, like you said,
all
the costume, the
effects
setting, everything else. Yeah.
The other interesting thing I read was that Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg would make routine appearances like nearly weekly to watch this production coming to life in Houston. They said every Sunday practically. In an interview with Disney Magazine, Jeffrey explained that he personally enjoyed not just the production, but the time to work more closely with Michael Eisner. He said, there were so many things happening within the company and within their particular responsibilities that it was something that he had missed. And I thought that was kind of touching.
Nice. Yeah, especially because that was kind of a rocky time in their relationship. Not long after that.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was nice that they had that time to reconnect and work together on something so closely. Good. So. In short, Beauty and the Beast had its last Broadway performance on July 29th, 2007. Over the course of the time on Broadway, there was a total of 5,464 performances and 46 previews. With its 13-year run, the musical remains still on the top 10 longest runs in the history of Broadway. It was Beauty and the Beast, as we said, that launched the Disney theatrical group, which has become a stage powerhouse and go on to produce 3 of the 15 longest running shows in the history of Broadway. And they obviously had such a dramatic change in the landscape of Broadway in theaters. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, Beauty and the Beast was kind of proof of concept, of that. Disney can come into Broadway and make something work. Because wasn't. I mean, they'd done musicals on the screen for a long time, but can you make that work on a stage as well?
Right.
So. Obviously, they thought that they could by the fact that they were revamping this theater and getting that prepared for what the future might hold. But still, until you actually have something happen and be a smash hit like Beauty and the Beast was, you can't be sure that it's going to be a success and that you can actually adapt these films to something that will work on Broadway.
Yeah. So, incredible. What it did. And, like I mentioned, earlier too, that it brought interest to the theater to a much younger audience as well, so it was kind of changing the landscape in that regards of, who is interested now in the theater, and, kind of setting the bar a little higher too of, what maybe not necessarily use of pyrotechnics or whatever, but looking at lighting, costuming, stage setting, because this was a pretty expensive venture for them to do. And, I think that they did kind of set the bar for other plays that were going to be following that.
Yeah, including their own.
Yeah,
including their own.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true. So what were your thoughts? Because you did see the theatrical production of The Beauty and the Beast. What were your thoughts of it?
I saw the touring company of it in San Diego. I've seen it a couple times, I believe, in San Diego, but I love it. I talked about this earlier. It's one of my favorite animated films from Disney. Seeing it on the stage, the new songs are wonderful. Some of the visual effects that they pull off on stage are pretty darn incredible.
Right.
Especially the transformation at the end. Spoiler alert. If you've never seen Beauty and the Beast, the transformation of the Beast back into the Prince is pretty incredible.
Yes.
How they pull that off on stage. It's amazing, but the whole thing, it's sweet, it's funny, it's heart. It touches your heart. You are sad at moments. It hits all the chords. I love it. I would see it again if it was coming around here next week. If we could get tickets for it, I'd go do it again. I think it's a spectacular musical, and it's like I said, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah. I just, like you said, how they told that story, the way they did it, and again, the choreography of how they were able to have these individuals who are, changing in their costume, but do such really impressive dance moves and things like that. Incredible.
And by the way, you do get a truncated version. It's a little bit different. It's partially on the animated film, partially on the live action film. But when you're on the Disney Dream, I believe, is the one that has Beauty and the Beast on it. Again, it's a truncated version. It's about an hour, but it still hits a lot of those notes. And when we saw it, the cast was spectacular.
Yeah,
really enjoyed that when we got to see it.
Yeah. I think standing ovation.
Nope,
so
completely.
Yeah. But it's not done. So what's ahead for Beauty and the Beast? Well, I was happy to read that there's a newly reimagined 30th anniversary production of Beauty and the Beast getting ready. And according to multiple sources, including Playbill, it will reunite some of the original Tony Award-winning team of artists, including Alan Menken, Tim Rice, Linda Wolverton, the screenplay writer, with direction and choreography by Matt West, scenic design of Stanley Mayer, and costume design by Anne Holdward. I hope I said her name right. And lighting designer Natasha Katz. So those original people who came up with the original Broadway production are coming back to formulate a new revised production of this.
So is it going to be on Broadway, or is it going to be to video?
No, it's not going to be.
Or is it a touring?
It's going to be a touring. It's they're going to be holding their technical rehearsals and begin performances in Schenectady Proctor's Theater in June of 2025, so a year from now, before the official opening in Chicago's Cadillac Palace Theater the following July.
Okay. So it'll be, even though it's the 30th anniversary celebration, it's 31, 32 years after it comes out.
They're kind of starting to do it at 30 years mark. Yeah. Ann Quartz, the executive producer, said, "We are thrilled to have once again gathered this world-class creative team on Beauty and the Beast under the masterful direction of the original team member, Matt West. Together, they created a beloved show in 1994, and today they're telling that story with all the charm and romance of the original production and newly resonant for today's audience. It's a pleasure to be back in the room with this peerless team as they rediscover and expand Beauty and the Beast.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm excited. We were just talking about I would go tomorrow, maybe if it comes around. Maybe I would imagine it's going to go to the Dr. Phillips Center at some point.
Yeah, I would think. Yeah,
and maybe we'll have to get tickets to go see it again.
Right.
Because I love it.
Yeah, they do have. They are showing some of the locations around the country. I take that back. There's another touring group right now going, but it's not to this level or anything like that.
Sure.
But yeah, I was excited to hear that they're, kind of looking at it, seeing how it could be updated. Obviously, we saw that happen when the live action happened, and they kind of converted some things there. So I expect this is going to be another masterpiece.
Yeah, I have no doubt, and I'm excited. I can't wait to find out when it's going to be coming near us.
Yeah. So that is kind of our look back at Broadway 30 years of Disney.
Very nice, and especially Beauty and the Beast that started it all off for Disney on Broadway 30 years ago. What did you say? It was in April, I believe, something along those lines. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. And by the way, if you ever get the chance, we've talked about Susan Egan a lot because we love her because she's fantastic. We've seen her a couple times on Disney Cruise Line. We've seen her in performances on a stage show, outside of the cruise as well.
Right.
If you ever get the chance to go see her, whether it be on a Disney cruise or whether she's doing something in your community, go check it out, especially if you're a fan of some of these musicals, because she'll tell stories about Beauty and the Beast along with singing several of the songs in there, including she's done many, many things on Broadway, other things as well. She'll do that. She also talks, if you don't know where you might have heard her voice, also she is Meg in Hercules. She'll talk about that and sing some of those songs occasionally as well. Definitely go see her. She puts on a phenomenal show. And if you have any interest in what happens on Broadway, she has some good stories to tell.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's really interesting. Like you said, with transforming from Beauty and the Beast to going into doing Meg, she describes it in a very interesting and comical way. Love it.
Yeah. And if you're on a Disney cruise, a lot of times you'll get a show, an actual main stage show one night, and there'll be another night where she'll do something a little more intimate at like something like the D Lounge or one of the smaller clubs, where she'll actually be kind of interviewed by somebody and then in between do songs. And that is really fascinating.
Right.
They're both aspects are fascinating.
That's true.
Yeah, definitely check her out. So, I love Beauty and the Beast. I love the film, love the stage show, and I love Michelle's research pieces. So this is all tied together in a beautiful little segment. Thank you, Michelle. Great job again.
Oh, thank you. You're kind.
And that is 30 years of Disney on Broadway, Beauty and the Beast.